There's something you've been calling you for as long as you can remember. A collection of traits, patterns of behavior, ways of showing up in the world that feel so familiar, so consistent, so you, that you've stopped questioning them. You say things like, I'm just a private person. I've always been the responsible one. I don't really do conflict. That's not who I am. And you believe it completely. But what if the thing you've spent your entire life calling your personality isn't entirely yours? What if the version of yourself you present to the world, the one you've refined through years of social feedback, childhood survival, and unconscious negotiation, is less a true expression of who you are and more a very convincing performance of who you learned to be? This is not a comfortable idea. I know that. The first time I really sat with it, something in me pushed back hard. Because we invest so much in our identity, we build entire lives around it. But Carl Jung would gently and relentlessly ask you to consider, what if that investment is the very thing keeping you from yourself? Stay with me, because what I'm about to share isn't a reason to fall apart. It's an invitation to finally come home. Before we go deeper, if this is already stirring something in you, I'd love for you to do two things. First, hit like and subscribe if you haven't yet. This kind of content takes time to find, and when you engage, it helps more people who are asking the same questions discover this space. And I have a question for you right now in the comments. What's one personality trait you've always believed defines you? And where do you think it came from? Take a moment, think about it, then come back. Think about how you introduce yourself. Not literally, not your name and job title. I mean the quiet, internal introduction. The one that runs underneath your conscious thoughts, the story you tell yourself about what kind of person you are. Maybe you're the dependable one, the creative one, the rational one who doesn't let emotions cloud their judgment, the empathetic one who always puts others first, the reserved one who needs space to recharge, the driven one who can't afford to slow down. These labels feel true because they've been consistent. They've shown up across different relationships, different jobs, different chapters of your life. And consistency to the human mind feels like proof. But here's a question worth sitting with. Were you born with these traits, or were you selected for them? Think back. The child who learned that being agreeable kept the peace at home. The teenager who discovered that being funny deflected attention from the things that scared them. The young adult who found that appearing confident, even when terrified, opened doors that vulnerability would have closed. We don't choose these adaptations consciously. We don't sit down at age 7 and decide, I will become the responsible one. It happens through repetition, through reward and withdrawal, through the slow accumulation of moments where one version of us was welcomed and another was not. And over time, those adaptations harden. They become habits, then character, then identity. You stop saying, I act this way, and start saying, I am this way. That's the moment the performance becomes the person. Jung saw this process clearly. He called the result the persona, a word he borrowed deliberately from the Latin term for the masks worn by actors in ancient theater. A mask that amplified the voice, that signaled to the audience who the character was before a word was spoken. The persona in Jung's framework is the social face we construct and present to the world. It is the interface between our inner life and the outer demands of society. And here is the crucial thing Jung understood. The persona is not inherently a problem. We need it. Every functioning social being has one. What becomes a problem? What becomes, in Jung's terms, one of the deepest forms of psychological suffering, is when we forget that we are wearing a mask at all. Think of it this way. Your personality is like a role you were cast into early in life. Maybe you didn't audition. Maybe someone else chose the part for you. A parent who needed you to be a certain way. A family system that had no room for the version of you that was too loud, too sensitive, too much, or not enough. And at first, you consciously perform the role. You feel the gap between the character and yourself. You know somewhere that this isn't the whole truth of you, but the human mind is extraordinarily adaptive. Over months and years, the performance becomes automatic. The gap narrows. The character's lines start to feel like your own thoughts. And one day, gradually, then all at once, you forget there was ever a script. You start calling the character by your name. That is the persona. And in its inflated form, when the mask has fully replaced the face, beneath, it is one of the most disorienting places a human being can find themselves. Not because they feel false, but because they feel nothing where their depth used to be. Because the mask has become so tight that genuine feeling can barely get through. What's the strongest personality trait you've always been proud of? Because here is what Jung observed, and what I have seen reflected in my own journey through these ideas. The more consistent your personality seems, the more suspicious it becomes. Not because consistency is bad, but because a living, complex human being is not consistent. Life moves us, experience changes us. Grief opens doors we didn't know existed. Joy cracks us open in different ways. The parts of us that never bend, never surprise us, never contradict the version we've presented, those are the parts worth looking at most closely. The persona forms through a process that begins long before we have the language to name it. A child learns almost immediately which versions of themselves are safe to show. The family system is the first stage, and like any stage, it has its unwritten rules. You learn what makes the room feel lighter, your humor, your compliance, your achievement. You're quiet, and you learn what makes it heavier, what causes faces to tighten, what earns withdrawal, irritation, or that particular kind of silence that feels worse than any argument. None of this is necessarily dramatic. The persona doesn't only form in difficult homes, it forms in loving ones too. Because even love, when expressed through consistent expectations, teaches a child to filter themselves through what is welcome and what is not. The child who is praised relentlessly for being smart begins to build an identity around intelligence, and somewhere quietly learns that being uncertain, being wrong, being lost, is not safe. Not because anyone said so explicitly, but because the praise only came for one kind of showing up. The child who is valued for being easy, for not making demands, for adapting to everyone else's needs, that child learns that their own needs are at best inconvenient. And so those needs don't disappear. They just go somewhere else. They go underground. This is where the persona and the shadow become inseparable. Because for every trait we develop and display, something opposite gets pushed aside. The responsible one represses their desire for chaos. The rational one buries their longing for surrender. The strong one hides a tenderness so old they've almost forgotten its name. Jung described the shadow as everything the persona is not, the unlived life, the unwanted self. And here is what matters for now. You cannot understand your persona without beginning to sense what it was built to hide. Before we go any further, I want to pause for a moment. Everything we're exploring here, I know it can awaken something, a recognition, a restlessness, a sense that you've been living on the surface of yourself for a long time, and that something deeper has been waiting. I've been in that place too. And when I needed more than information. I needed structure, a way to move through this material that went beyond a single video. If you're feeling that pull right now, if you want to go deeper in a way that's organized and supported, there's a link in the description. Take a look when the video ends. It might be exactly what you need at this stage of the journey. Now let's keep going. Let's talk about and see what persona inflation actually feels like from the inside. Because it rarely announces itself as a crisis. It begins as efficiency. You've found a version of yourself that works. It gets results. It earns approval. It keeps relationships functional and the world predictable. So you lean into it. You optimize it. You become over time extremely good at being the person you've agreed to be. And for a while this feels like strength. The trouble begins at the edges. You notice maybe that certain situations feel strangely suffocating. Places where a different version of you seems to want to surface, but you don't quite know what to do with it. A creative impulse that feels frivolous, an anger that feels inappropriate, a longing for something you can't easily name or justify. You push it aside because the persona has no place for those things. And the persona by now is your operating system. It decides what thoughts are worth having, what feelings are worth feeling, what desires are acceptable, and which ones need to be redirected into something more productive, more socially legible, more you, or rather, more the you that you've agreed to be. Jung observed that people caught in persona inflation often describe a vague but persistent sense of emptiness. Not depression exactly, not suffering in the way the word is typically used, but a flatness. A sense that they are moving through their life competently, successfully even, but somehow from a distance, as if they are watching themselves perform rather than actually inhabiting their own experience. One phrase that comes up again and again in this territory, I don't know what I actually want, not because the person lacks preference, but because the persona has been making those decisions for so long that the original voice underneath, quieter, stranger, more complicated, has been almost entirely drowned out. You weren't born easygoing. You were trained to be tolerated. That line should land somewhere. Because it speaks to something most people with a highly developed persona eventually confront, the exhaustion of maintenance. Because a persona isn't something you build once. It's something you sustain. Every social interaction requires a subtle recalibration. Every new relationship is, at first, a negotiation. Which version of me does this person need? Which aspects do I foreground? Which do I quietly set aside? And this isn't conscious manipulation. It's a deeply ingrained, largely automatic process. But it is expensive. Every personality hides a negotiation you made long ago, and the bill comes due in the form of fatigue, resentment, and the creeping sense that no one actually knows you, because they don't. They know your persona. And even more unsettling, sometimes neither do you. There are moments when the mask slips. You might recognize them. They tend to come in transition, loss, illness, a relationship ending, a success that doesn't feel the way you thought it would. Moments when the scaffolding of identity that you've built around yourself suddenly fails to hold the weight of what you're actually experiencing. Something rises up that doesn't fit the narrative. You react with more rage than the situation warrants and feel confused by your own intensity. You feel a wave of grief in a moment that should be ordinary. You sit with someone you love and realize, with a strange sadness, that they have never actually met you. Or the quieter version, you're alone with no role to perform, no function to fulfill, no one who needs you to be a particular way. And in that silence, instead of rest, you feel a strange anxiety, because without the role, you're not quite sure who's there. These are the cracks in the persona, and here is the wisdom embedded in them. If you can resist the impulse to seal them immediately, they are not signs that something is wrong with you. They are signs that something is trying to become known. The mask doesn't feel like a mask until it starts suffocating you. And the suffocation, as uncomfortable as it is the beginning of the real story. If what lies beneath the persona has a name in Jung's framework, it is the shadow. Not in the way the word is often sensationalized, as a dark twin, a hidden monster, the secret evil lurking beneath the civilized surface. That framing misses the point, and Jung would be the first to say so. The shadow is simply everything that didn't make it into the persona. Every trait, impulse, capacity, and desire that was too complicated, too inconvenient, or too misaligned with the identity you were building. The shadow is not inherently dangerous. It is, in many cases, deeply alive. The responsible, high-achieving person whose shadow contains a wild hunger for stillness and aimless beauty. The endlessly empathetic caretaker whose shadow holds a fury that has never once been allowed to speak. The controlled intellectual whose shadow is shaking with emotion, with need, with longing for something that can't be thought its way to. You don't express your personality, you maintain it. And the energy that goes into that maintenance is energy that isn't available for growth, for depth, for the kind of aliveness that makes a life feel genuinely inhabited. This is why Jung placed such weight on what he called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming more fully yourself. Not by destroying the persona, but by loosening its grip, by cultivating a relationship with the parts of you that the mask was built to hide, by learning to move between the two, between the social face and the deeper self, with awareness and with intention, rather than compulsion. The shadow isn't the enemy. It is the part of you that has been waiting in the dark for someone trustworthy to finally come looking. This is the moment where I want to stay with you for a moment before we move toward the close. Because if this conversation has touched something real in you, if you felt recognition or unease, or that particular ache of something seen for the first time, I want to acknowledge that. This work is not easy. Seeing your own mask clearly is one of the more disorienting experiences a person can have, and it can bring up the very thing the persona was built to avoid, the fear of not being enough without it. So before I ask you anything, I just want to say, you being here, willing to sit with this, is already something. If you've found this useful, hit like and subscribe. It means everything for this channel and helps us keep building this kind of content. And the question I want to leave in the comments with you, and I genuinely want to read your response, if your personality is partly a mask, what's one side of you that rarely gets seen, but feels real when it does? Take your time with that. Write it down, even if not here. It matters. And if you're ready to go deeper in a structured way, to move through this. Material with intention and support, the link in the description is still there. It's not going anywhere, and neither are you. So what do we do with all of this? The first instinct, when someone tells you that your personality might be a construction, is either to dismiss it, that can't be right, I know who I am, or to collapse into it. If none of this is real, then who am I? Both responses miss the invitation. Jung never argued that the persona should be destroyed. He wasn't asking anyone to tear off the mask in the middle of a dinner party and start howling at the walls. The persona is functional, it allows us to navigate social reality with some degree of efficiency and coherence. The goal is not its elimination, the goal is consciousness. What changes everything is not getting rid of the mask, but knowing you're wearing one, developing the ability to step back from your most automatic self descriptions and ask, is this true? Or is this what worked? Is this who I am? Or is this who I learned to be? And then gently, slowly, with a great deal of patience and beginning to make room for what else is there. This is not a project that completes. It is an orientation, a practice of returning again and again to the question underneath all the labels, not who am I, but what is actually alive in me right now. The discomfort you felt at the beginning of this video, that subtle resistance but that can't be right, that was your persona doing its job, protecting the story, keeping the mask in place, but you stayed, and something in you already knows why. The lie was never that you had a personality. The lie was that it was the whole of you. Beneath the mask, something has been waiting, something more honest, more strange, more alive than the careful version you've been presenting to the world. The work of individuation, the work Jung devoted his life to understanding, Nyamusyoi, is simply this, learning to let that something speak. And it begins, as most real things do, with the willingness to look.